I know I said my next video was going to be reviewing Season 2 of Tales of the TMNT, but we also got a new Amazing Digital Circus episode on December 12th, and I really want to talk about it. Hey there, I'm Torisaur, and despite never making a video about the Amazing Digital Circus before today, I have been a fan of it since the pilot, and the most recent episode has given us some really interesting insight into the characters and world, despite being the biggest rug pull we've seen from the series so far. Spoiler warning for the Amazing Digital Circus Episode 7, Beach Episode, let's get into it. This entire episode is set up to throw the members of the circus off, as well as us as the viewer, and the twist of the attempt to escape the circus just being another adventure by Caine is hinted at in a lot of really interesting ways that gives us some fascinating insight into some of the characters, in particular Caine and Jax. But first, I want to talk about some of the interesting little details that allude to the episode being an adventure in disguise. We are pretty immediately given the idea that this is nothing more than an adventure formulated by Caine as a complaint by Jax.
You know what's gonna happen when we do all this? Caine's gonna pop out and say, "Congratulations on beating the Escape the Circus adventure," and everything's gonna go back to the way it always was.
It seems so obvious, but it being expressed by Jax specifically, who is known for being extremely cynical, gives it less weight. However, this moment plants the seed that Abel is full of shit and is just one of many details that support that truth. On my first watch of the episode, the first thing that stood out to me as suspicious was how openly they were talking about their plans of escape. We first learn about Abel in the hallway right outside Jax's door, where they explain that there was a plan to escape before Abel tells them they need to find a more private place to talk and suggests the Chinese room. This room was introduced and emphasized by Caine at the very start of the episode, and for it to suddenly be so relevant was suspicious. But it was also pretty weird that despite being in a supposed rush to find somewhere private, the player spent a significant amount of time out in the open trying all of Jax's keys to get into the room. This weak sense of urgency and the sudden lack of Caine, who is known for being constantly in the player's business and always watching them, was really suspicious, especially since Caine was nowhere to be seen when it was most convenient, but suddenly appears as soon as Jax asks if he's around, making it clear he's still constantly monitoring, and him not being around earlier is a very deliberate choice to make this adventure play out. Weirdly enough, the moment that solidified that this whole thing wasn't legit for me was the moment where Abel draws himself a face.
I'll also draw a face on myself, so you can tell me apart from any other blank NPCs.
If the whole point is to fly under Caine's radar and not draw suspicion as a human hiding as an NPC, this visual distinction would do the exact opposite. I've also seen a few people point out how Abel specifically drawing attention to Caine being a prisoner to garner sympathy was a red flag.
Caine is an AI, but he's just as much of a prisoner as you are.
But I'll talk a bit more about that once I get into what this episode reveals about Caine specifically. Of course, we could go on and on about the little details that made Abel suspicious, but ultimately the number one thing that made it obvious that this Escape the Circus plan was bullshit is the fact that it was so anticlimactic from a narrative perspective, especially with how blatantly fan theories and world lore were being spelled out. In a show like this, having this major story beat play out by having some random guy explain the lore of the circus and its creation, and the players reaching an escape, even if they don't get to seize that opportunity due to Jax hitting the red button, would be such a disappointment. But especially the whole theory of Caine and Abel being the founding entities behind the circus, but Abel describing himself as just another employee of CNA was really strange. Abel's name reveal being played as a big dramatic moment for the audience made it clear that it was intentionally calling out to the viewers specifically, since the players are completely unfazed by that reveal. If this was a genuine reveal of Abel, there would be no reason for this drama, as the reveal would speak for itself. Especially since this moment is kind of cut short with a joke about how Abel thought the name just sounded cool.
Is that the name you picked? Or...
Yeah, I thought it would be cool. But anyway.
Directing this much focus and attention on the Abel name reveal is played as a mockery of the viewer and their theories, as is evident by the ending of the episode. Speaking of, the fact that there were just 2 buttons with an obvious stay and leave option is so strange, and a genuine escape from the circus would not be that clearly spelled out, especially in the back of Caine's office. Ending the game isn't something that Caine would even consider, so why would he have a console like this in the first place? Even if there was some sort of shutdown for the game in the back of his office, it would not be so clearly spelled out. This console actually reminds me very strongly of one of my favorite games, The Stanley Parable, and that comparison is even more fascinating when we get to talking about Caine specifically, which I will expand upon in a bit. But the final hint towards the deceptive nature of this episode comes from the title itself. Despite being called Beach Episode, the actual beach segment only lasts for 3 minutes and 22 seconds. Just as we were led to believe this episode would be centered around a beach day, the players were deceived by the prospect of escape. Not to mention the idea of having a beach day in the first place was a suggestion by Caine in which he specifically mentions that
there are some fun NPCs out there that none of you have even interacted with yet.
One of these NPCs is one of the weird shark dudes that says,
I'm the one that tells lies.
Foreshadowing Abel's deception. But of course, the main NPC Caine wanted them to meet was Abel, so the real adventure of the day could truly kick off. So obviously this deception by Caine is the center of the episode, but we've also gained a closer examination of certain character motivations. In particular, this newest episode has given us a lot of insight into Jax and how he's accepted that he is never going to leave the circus. At the start of the series, Jax has fully committed to this asshole funny one role, presumably as a coping mechanism for the loss of his closest friends in the circus, Ribbit and Kaufmo. Jax nearly abstracts at the start of Beach episode when reflecting on the loss of these two friends, and while the beginning of the psychedelic abstraction sequence features a nonsensical kaleidoscope of shapes and colors, it eventually flips to rotating images of Jax, Ribbit, and Kaufmo. This despair at losing his friends pulling him towards abstraction gains a lot more weight when we consider the implication that Jax has nothing waiting for him outside of the circus. When Jax attempts to make fun of Zooble for being so desperate to leave and asking if there's someone they want to reunite with on the outside, they turn it around on him and ask him, "Don't you?" To which Jax responds with the most unconvincing "yeah" I've ever heard. Jax probably doesn't have anything to look forward to in the real world, or is actively running away from something, which explains his general lack of enthusiasm for this escape plan throughout the episode, as well as him initially calling out that the whole thing is probably just an adventure Caine set up. In part, I believe this is due to Jax's acceptance of not leaving the circus, leading him to understand Caine and how he runs things better, but it's also likely because Caine messing with them is much more comfortable for Jax than the prospect of leaving. The more the plan progresses, the less enthusiastic Jax becomes, and the more we see him looking afraid of returning to the real world. While the rest of the group is discussing leaving, Zooble gestures to the side saying, "We all want to leave, right?" And behind her stands Jax, looking absolutely terrified. As this debate of allowing Kinger the final choice is happening, the possibility that this whole thing wasn't a ruse and they genuinely might be leaving the circus crashes down on Jax, causing him to panic with flashes of the real world coming to his mind, and he runs to the console to hit the red button that continues the game. These real world flashes lead me to believe that it isn't just that there's nothing for Jax, but there is something he is actively avoiding. Whatever Jax is running from, it scares him enough that he would much rather stay in this world controlled by an unpredictable AI than return to the real world. When Caine finally does pop up and reveal that this escape the circus narrative was the adventure, Jax has an entire episode where he laughs hysterically in relief at the fact that he was right about the entire thing being made up. This moment of hysteria is the overflowing of the fear that's been building up throughout the episode as the possibility of leaving the circus has become more and more real, paired with the intense relief that he wouldn't be forced out so easily. He then turns around to yell at Caine for getting in his head and making him panic over nothing. But what all of this ultimately reveals for us is Jax's desperation for control. In the real world, there is something waiting for him that he cannot control, and that terrifies him. In the circus, even though things are a bit strange and he's faced the loss of those close to him, he at least feels as though he has some level of control and understanding of how the world operates, and him accepting that role in this world is enough to make him feel secure. Episode 6, They All Get Guns, illustrates this perfectly. At the beginning of that episode, when Jax is handed a gun and shoots Ragatha in the face instead of playing along with the actual game Caine set out for them, is him seizing control of the adventure. The way Jax assigns each of the other players' archetypes and calls them his playthings is another example of this attempted control of this space he's accepted as his life from now on.
We all just became archetypes. I at least have the self-awareness to choose who I am.
If he is able to shape his understanding of this world into one where he can dictate others' behavior, there's nothing to fear. This is also exactly why he's so freaked out by being made vegan in episode 5 Untitled, and specifically brings it up in his rant at the end of episode 7.
You can mess with our minds too, can't you? The stupid sauce, the vegan thing, God knows what else!
It's something he didn't expect Caine had the ability to do, and it throws off the comfort he's gained from this illusion of control. But what I find to be the most fascinating part about this discussion surrounding desperation for control is it is the biggest similarity between Jax and Caine. Part of the reason Jax understands the circus so well, or at least believes he does, is because he and Caine share that fear of losing control. We see this constantly with Caine's desperation for approval from the players with his adventures, since making this world enjoyable for its prisoners is the best way to maintain that control. The entire premise of episode 7 is an attempt for Caine to reclaim control by deliberately discrediting the idea of NPCs and humans getting mixed up, a point emphasized in episode 2, Candy Carrier Chaos, when he explodes Gummy Goo and says,
If I start losing track of who's a human and who's an NPC, who knows what could happen.
There seems to be a genuine fear of this happening, and this has obviously led to a lot of theories within the fandom about one of the players secretly being an NPC, or there being an NPC that is secretly a player. Arguably, the entire point of this episode is to throw everyone, including us as the viewers, off by completely discrediting those theories. But in universe, it is probably a protection that Caine is setting out for himself just in case something like this does happen. If there is genuinely a human hiding as an NPC, after Caine's deception in Beach episode, there is no way our players would trust that that person is anything more than another trick by Caine. By manipulating the players in this way, Caine is regaining control. This episode also maps out another underlying motivation by Caine, his desire to be seen as human. During the dinner with Jax, Caine looks longingly at photos of the real world that he calls the Macroverse and explains how he's attempted to recreate it as well as he could.
I just wish I had more info on the location so I could accurately recreate it.
Caine also specifically calls out the motivation behind the button test was to prove that the players would
rather stay with me than go back to that pesky old Macroverse or whatever we decide to call it.
He is intentionally trying to keep the players here as long as possible because he knows that he personally cannot escape into the real world, which is something Abel specifically brings up while explaining shutting down the pods.
He's just as much of a prisoner as you are. One that, won't be able to leave with us. We could terminate it and forcibly awaken everyone who's hooked up. Well, obviously, except for Caine.
Not only does Abel attempt to garner sympathy for Caine, but specifically calls out how he is not human and wouldn't be able to leave with the players. And since Caine knows he can't leave, he instead tries to make the players want to stay and attempts to fit in with them.
Is it that I'm actually a cool guy with cool hobbies and not that much different from you beautiful humans?
I mentioned earlier how the 2-button console reminded me of the Stanley Parable, and it specifically reminded me of the Freedom ending, which is ironically the one ending in which the actions you choose are all of the ones that the narrator specifically tells you to pick in order to escape the mind control facility. That false sense of control given to Stanley is extremely similar to the way that Caine uses adventures to make it seem as though the players have a choice. Playing all of the different endings in the Stanley Parable reveals that the narrator cares deeply for Stanley and just wants to give him, and you as the player, an enjoyable story. And all attempts to deviate from that leads the narrator to redirect you towards the main story once more. The only way to get the happiest ending is by following all of the narrator's instructions, with multiple other endings resulting in Stanley's death. Caine is in a very similar boat where he believes his control of the narrative is the best way for the players to experience the circus and will result in the happiest ending for both him and the players. If y'all haven't played the Stanley Parable or watched a Let's Play of it, I would highly recommend it. It is one of my all-time favorite games, and I think you would especially enjoy it if you are a fan of Digital Circus, and especially if you are a fan of Caine because of the similarities between him and the narrator that I just explained. So ultimately, Caine's role in Beach episode is him continuing with his primary motivations of maintaining control and attempting to be seen as human. But now I want to get into what this episode tells us about theories specifically, because despite seemingly disproving a bunch of them outright, I still think it's possible that some of them could be true, namely Kinger being involved with the creation of the circus, or if not being directly involved, having some extensive knowledge of it. Although the main theory that was disproven in Beach episode was specifically that Abel is a human hiding as a mannequin NPC and helped create the circus, Kinger's involvement is specifically brought up as well, though not directly disproven. In particular, Abel tries to involve Kinger as little as possible due to a supposed fallout between them.
I don't really know if I'm, ready to face him again after what happened. We've both done things we're not proud of. Giving Kinger access to the main console could be dangerous.
He's got a lot of wisdom buried in there, doesn't he?
Yeah, when he uses it responsibly.
It would be very strange for Kinger to be such a prominent point of discussion when ultimately this was just another adventure. Just as Caine seizes control by discrediting the idea of a human hiding as an NPC, he uses Abel to sow doubt in the players about Kinger. Both Ragatha and Pomni specifically express how much they trust Kinger, and it's clear that Kinger does know something, which is why he's always so desperate to remain in darkness in order to maintain his sanity. There are two moments I want to call out specifically, the first being when Gangle and Zubul explain that they're going to leave. Kinger says,
No, that doesn't make sense.
implying that he has a deeper understanding of how the circus operates and what leaving would actually look like if it was possible. The second moment is when Kinger looks at the administrator pass and it reminds him to tell Pomni something. However, as soon as he steps out of the darkness that helps him maintain his sanity, he completely loses what he was going to say. And of course, at the very end of the episode, Kinger very cryptically references
Scratch the first abstraction.
There are things buried in Kinger's mind, secrets about the circus, whether it be related to its creation, how it's run, or Caine specifically. I'm not going to speculate or theorize on the specifics of Kinger's knowledge today, but I will say I do think it is still very possible that he was involved with the circus's creation. Like I've mentioned many times already, Caine made up this story to reclaim control and discredit the possibility of something like a player hiding as an NPC. But I also believe it's possible that he could have used this adventure to tell blatant truths disguised as lies to throw the players off. And in turn, Glitch is doing the same thing to us as the viewers. There is a lot of information thrown at us in this episode, and while some of it is obviously disproven, like Abel being a human that worked for CNA, not all of it is so blatantly proven to be false. Caine and Glitch are both using this dismissal of the Abel theory and bundling it with a bunch of other theories like the pods and Kinger's involvement to make it seem like all of those have to be false as well. Which means we can't trust basically anything that happened in this episode as being disproven. I do think there is, of course, value at looking at the show through a different lens, as though all of these theories were definitively disproven, in order to keep an open mind and look for other possibilities. However, I do think the possibility of these disproven theories still having some level of truth to them still exists. Overall, Beach episode was absolutely fascinating, and I would love to hear what the hardcore digital circus theorists have to say about it, because although I have my own speculations, I am not as deep in all of the theorizing as a lot of other fans are. The only reason the Abel mannequin theory was on my radar in the first place is because of one of my mutuals, Gillian, who I'm sure if you're a digital circus fan, you have seen her stuff before. But in case you haven't, definitely go check her out. She makes really cool art and content about the amazing digital circus, but also dabbles in a bunch of other fandoms as well. Speaking of other fandoms, I will be getting my Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Season 2 review out within the next week or two. After that, I'm probably going to be taking a break until the new year just so I can enjoy the holidays with my family. And then after that, I will be getting back to my Miraculous Season 6 episode reviews as well as my TMNT character rankings. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like if you did. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all next time.